Lieutenant General Charles P. Cabell, Director of Air Force Intelligence, is reading a stack of reports from Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. 3 days of radar incidents at one of the most sensitive installations in the country. September 10, 1951. A student operator's tracking system, designed to follow fighter jets, cannot keep up with a target. September 11th. A silver disc outpaces a T-33 trainer jet near Sandy Hook. September 12th. Radar tracks an object at extreme altitude over Point Pleasant. Cabell reads the reports. Then he looks at what Project Grudge has been producing for the past 3 years. Then he calls an emergency briefing at the Pentagon. According to Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was in the room, Cabell demanded to know why sightings were piling up with no serious analysis. Why was his intelligence directorate running a project that existed on paper but produced nothing of value? Why was nobody investigating? The Dark Ages were over. Cabell was going to tear the whole thing down and start again.
This is Unresolved Signals, an AI-powered investigation into the oldest open question in human history. Every document, every country, every question, every release.
Every source cited in this episode is linked on our source page at unresolvedsignals.com. The primary sources for this episode include Captain Edward Ruppelt's 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, the most detailed insider account of this period. Additional material comes from the United States Air Force fact sheet on Project Blue Book, the Battelle Memorial Institute's Project Blue Book Special Report number 14, the CIA's published history of its role in the study of UFOs by Gerald Haynes, the AARO Historical Record Report submitted to Congress, and declassified Project Blue Book case files from the National Archives. Last episode, we told the story of how the Air Force's first honest investigation was destroyed from above. Science analysts followed the evidence, wrote a top-secret conclusion, and Vandenberg ordered it burned. Project Grudge replaced it with a mandate to explain everything away. The Dark Ages lasted nearly 3 years. By late 1951, 2 generals decided they were done. Cabell had been watching sighting reports accumulate on his desk with no serious analysis attached to any of them. Fort Monmouth was the breaking point. He was joined by Brigadier General William Garland, newly assigned to his staff. Garland brought something unusual to the table. He had personally seen a UFO. A general officer, career military, his own eyes. He was not a believer in any particular theory. He was a man who had witnessed something he could not explain, and he believed the question deserved the same rigor the Air Force applied to any other intelligence problem. Together, they dismantled Project Grudge and authorized a complete overhaul. The person they chose to lead it would become the most important figure in the history of military UFO research. And the first thing he did was fire everyone who had already decided the answer. Staff members who were committed believers in extraterrestrial visitors were let go. Staff members who were committed debunkers, convinced that every sighting had a conventional explanation, were also let go. The investigation would follow evidence. The people running it would have open minds, or they would not be running it. The man enforcing that standard was Captain Edward Ruppelt. 2 distinguished flying crosses, degree in aeronautical engineering from Iowa State, combat veteran, Pacific Theater. He was 30 years old, and he had no patience for predetermined conclusions. In March of 1952, Ruppelt established Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A new unit was created, the Aerial Phenomena Branch. The name itself was a statement. This was no longer a temporary assignment tucked inside someone else's division. It was a branch, with staff, with authority, with a mandate. Then he changed the language. He replaced the terms flying saucer and flying disc with a new coinage. Unidentified flying object, UFO. 3 words, neutral and precise. The old terms came loaded with tabloid connotations and cocktail party jokes. Ruppelt's term described what the reports actually contained. Unidentified, flying, object, nothing more, nothing less. That term defined the conversation for 70 years. It was the official language of every government report, every congressional hearing, every classified briefing until the Pentagon formally adopted UAP in 2017. Even now, most of the world still says UFO. The word was coined by one captain in 1952 who wanted his investigation taken seriously. He created a standardized witness questionnaire so that every report, from every base, from every witness, captured the same categories of information. Before Ruppelt, reporting was inconsistent. One base might file a detailed technical assessment, another might forward a handwritten note. The questionnaire meant that data from different sightings could be compared, analyzed, and searched for patterns. He streamlined military reporting procedures to reduce the stigma for witnesses. Pilots and radar operators who reported something unusual were no longer treated as problems to be managed. They were treated as sources of intelligence. He was granted unprecedented authority. Ruppelt could interview any military personnel at any base, bypassing the normal chain of command. That kind of access is almost unheard of for a captain. It meant that a two-star general could not block Ruppelt from talking to a radar operator who had seen something unusual. That authority came directly from Cabell and Garland. It signaled how seriously they took the overhaul. Every Air Force base had a designated Blue Book officer whose job was to collect and forward sighting reports to Wright-Patterson. For the first time, there was an actual network feeding a centralized investigation. Michael D. Swords, a historian of the UFO research programs, later wrote that Ruppelt would lead the last genuine effort to analyze UFOs. For 18 months, the United States Air Force was asking the question honestly. One of the early cases that tested Ruppelt's Blue Book came from Lubbock, Texas. On the evening of August 25, 1951, 4 professors from Texas Technological College were sitting in a backyard: a geologist, a chemical engineer, a petroleum engineer, and a physicist. These were not casual observers. They were trained scientists outdoors on a clear evening, when a formation of 15 to 30 soft, glowing, bluish-green lights streaked across the sky from north to south in a semicircular arrangement. They watched, and then it happened again. Over the following weeks, the professors observed the lights at least 12 more times. They measured the angular velocity at 30 degrees per second. They recorded dates, times, weather conditions, and precise descriptions. Hundreds of other Lubbock residents also reported the lights during the same period. On August 31st, an amateur photographer named Carl Hart Jr. captured 5 photographs of the lights in a V formation from his bedroom window. The Air Force Photo Reconnaissance Laboratory examined Hart's negatives and confirmed they showed intensely bright circular light sources. But the lab made one observation that stood out from everything else. The lights, which appeared dim to the naked eye, were overexposed on film. That behavior is consistent with a source that is extremely bright in the infrared spectrum, but dim in visible light. The lab's assessment: we have nothing in this world that flies that appears dim to the eye, yet will show bright on film. 20 minutes before the professor's first sighting that evening, something else happened 150 miles to the west. An employee of the Atomic Energy Commission and his wife were in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They reported seeing a massive shape in the sky, what they described as a flying wing, 1.5 times the size of a B-36 bomber, with pairs of soft, glowing, bluish lights on its trailing edge. Same night, same time window, same bluish glow. 150 miles apart, Ruppelt personally investigated the Lubbock case. He initially considered the possibility that the lights were birds reflecting the glow of mercury vapor street lamps. He later rejected this. In his book, he wrote that the professor's sightings had been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomenon, but refused to reveal the explanation, having promised anonymity to the scientist who provided it. That is a strange sentence to write: identified but unrevealed, a solution that exists but cannot be shared. The case remains officially classified as unknown in Air Force files. Ruppelt's most ambitious move was something no previous investigation had attempted. He outsourced the data. For the first time, the question would be answered not by generals or politicians or newspaper editors, but by statisticians who had no stake in the outcome. He commissioned the Battelle Memorial Institute, a respected independent research organization based in Columbus, Ohio, to conduct a comprehensive statistical analysis of every UFO sighting report the Air Force had collected. The resulting study, published in 1954 as Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14, was 316 pages long. It remains the most rigorous statistical analysis of UFO data ever conducted by or for the United States government. Battelle's analysts processed 3,201 sighting reports collected between 1947 and 1952. Each case was evaluated and placed into one of 3 categories: known, unknown, or insufficient information. The classification standard was deliberately asymmetric. To mark a case as known, only 2 of 4 analysts needed to agree. To mark a case as unknown, all 4 had to agree. The unknown designation carried a higher evidentiary bar. This was built into the methodology by design. Then they ran the numbers. 21.5% of cases remained unknown after analysis. These were not vague reports from unreliable witnesses. These were cases that had sufficient data, sufficient witness credibility, and sufficient detail for the analysts to make a determination. They made a determination. The determination was, we cannot explain this. The study found that unknown cases had distinctly different characteristics from known cases across 5 measured dimensions: size, speed, color, shape, and duration of observation. These were not random noise. They were a statistically distinct population. And here is the finding that should have changed the conversation. The higher the quality of the sighting report, the more likely it was to remain unexplained. 35% of cases rated excellent were classified as unknown. Only 18% of the poorest quality cases earned that designation. Think about what that means. If UFOs were simply misidentifications, better data should produce more identifications. More detail should make it easier to explain what someone saw. Instead, more detail made it harder. The better the observation, the less it fit conventional explanations. That is the exact inverse of the debunking hypothesis. The analysts applied the chi-square statistical test to compare known and unknown cases across 6 characteristics. In 5 of the 6 measures, the odds of the two groups differing by chance alone were 1% or less. When all 6 characteristics were considered together, the probability that known and unknown cases were drawn from the same population was less than 1 in a billion. Less than 1 in a billion. And yet the report's own summary section concluded that it was highly improbable that the unknowns represented anything beyond present-day scientific knowledge. Researchers have noted this conclusion was at odds with the report's own 240 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. When the Air Force released the report to the public in October of 1955, it made the disconnect worse. The Air Force told the press that the study had scientifically proved UFOs did not exist. They claimed only 3% of cases were unknowns, a fraction of the actual 22%. They asserted the residual would disappear with more data, ignoring the fact that the analysts had already filtered out poorly documented cases into the insufficient information category. Both the knowns and the unknowns were cases deemed to have enough information to make a determination. The determination had been made. The full report is declassified. It is available at archive.org. You can read every one of those 316 pages yourself.
This episode is sponsored by What's Near Me Now. Visit nearmenow.us to find events near you.
While Battelle was running the numbers, something happened that made the numbers irrelevant to the people in charge. July 1952, Washington, D.C. 11:40 p.m., July 19th. Air route traffic control radar at Washington National Airport picks up 7 targets east and south of Andrews Air Force Base. Moving slow, 100 to 130 miles per hour. Then one of them accelerates, 7,000 miles per hour. The targets move into every sector of the scope, including restricted airspace over the White House, over the Capitol building. Andrews Air Force Base confirms on its own radar. National Airport Control Tower confirms on a third, separate system. At one point, all 3 installations track a single target simultaneously. It hovers for 30 seconds. Then it vanishes from all 3 scopes at the same instant. On the ground, an airman at Andrews Air Force Base sees it. An orange ball of fire trailing a tail. It makes a circular movement. Then it takes off. His words, at an unbelievable speed, disappeared in a split second. 1 week later, July 26th. Same radar operators, same equipment, slow-moving targets in an arc from Herndon, Virginia to Andrews Air Force Base. 2 F-94 interceptor jets scrambled from Newcastle County Air Force Base in Delaware. The jets arrive over Washington. The targets disappear from radar. The jets leave. The targets come back. Lieutenant William Patterson was one of the F-94 pilots, Korean War veteran, flying the fastest interceptor the Air Force had. He reported making visual contact with several bright lights. His words, I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet. I was at my maximum speed, but even then I had no closing speed. I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. A combat pilot, maximum speed, no closing speed. Patterson later changed his official report. The revised version attributed what he saw to a ground light reflecting off haze. The Washington sightings dominated the national news. They beat the Democratic National Convention out of the headline space. On July 29th, Major General John Samford held the largest Air Force press conference since World War II. Ruppelt wrote that Samford made an honest effort to straighten out the facts, but had to hedge on many answers because he did not have them. Captain Roy James, the Air Technical Intelligence Center's radar expert, offered an explanation: temperature inversions, warm air layering over cool air, bending radar waves, producing false returns. The experienced air traffic controllers at National Airport rejected this. They dealt with temperature inversion effects on their radar every night. These were not fuzzy, scattered returns drifting across a scope. These were hard, solid targets. The controllers were emphatic. Ruppelt noted the problem. Inversions were present almost every night that summer. The hard targets appeared on only a few nights. And the inversions on those specific nights were never strong enough to produce the anomalies Captain James described. The press ran with it anyway. The next morning, Air Force debunked saucers as just natural phenomena. Project Blue Book continued to carry the Washington sightings as unknowns. The noise was over. Now the people who operate in silence entered the room. The Washington wave brought the White House into the conversation. Brigadier General Landry, President Truman's military aide, called Ruppelt directly, demanding answers. And the CIA, which had been monitoring the UFO situation from a distance since 1947, decided the situation had become a problem it could no longer watch from the sideline. H. Marshall Chadwell, Assistant Director of the Office of Scientific Intelligence, briefed Director of Central Intelligence Walter Battelle Smith directly. Chadwell laid out two concerns. The first was operational. UFO reports were flooding the military's air defense warning system. Every time someone called in a saucer sighting, it consumed bandwidth that existed to detect Soviet bombers. If the Soviets launched a nuclear first strike during a UFO wave, the warning system might be too saturated to function. The second concern was psychological. Mass public interest in UFOs could be exploited by the Soviet Union for disinformation purposes. Hysteria was a weapon. The American public was demonstrating that it could be made hysterical about objects in the sky. Chadwell told Smith there was only one chance in 10,000 that the phenomenon posed a threat to the security of the country. But even that chance, he wrote, could not be taken. The Director of Central Intelligence decided to convene a secret panel of scientists to settle the question. They would review the best evidence the Air Force had collected over the previous 6 years. They would deliver a recommendation, and that recommendation would determine the future of military UFO investigation in the United States. Everything Edward Ruppelt built was about to be judged. Here's what we can state about the evidence presented in this episode. Confirmed, Lieutenant General Charles P. Cabell held an emergency Pentagon briefing after the Fort Monmouth radar incidents of September 10 through 12, 1951, and ordered the overhaul of Project Grudge. Brigadier General William Garland, who had personally witnessed a UFO, supported the decision. This is documented in Ruppelt's book and Air Force records. Confirmed, Captain Edward Ruppelt established Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in March of 1952. He coined the term UFO, created standardized reporting, was granted authority to interview any military personnel at any base, and fired staff who held predetermined conclusions. The historical record on Ruppelt is extensive and consistent across multiple sources. Confirmed, Battelle Memorial Institute's Special Report Number 14 analyzed 3,201 cases and found 21.5% remained unknown. The inverse relationship between sighting quality and explanation rate is documented in the report itself. The chi-square test results showing less than 1 in a billion probability are in the published data. The Air Force mischaracterized the report's findings to the press. The full report is declassified and publicly available. Confirmed, objects were tracked on radar over Washington, D.C. on July 19th through 20th and July 26th through 27th, 1952, by 3 independent radar systems. F-94 interceptors were scrambled. Major General Samford held the largest Air Force press conference since World War II on July 29th. Blue Book classified the incidents as unknown. This is documented in Ruppelt's book, The Condon Report's Radar Analysis, Haynes's CIA History, and Air Force Records. Confirmed, the CIA, through Assistant Director H. Marshall Chadwell, briefed DCI Walter Battelle Smith on the UFO situation in late 1952. Smith authorized the convening of a secret scientific panel. This is documented in the CIA's own published history. Probable. Lieutenant Patterson's account of being unable to close on the objects is based on Ruppelt's reporting and is consistent with multiple witness descriptions from both nights. His subsequent report revision to a ground light explanation has not been independently corroborated as voluntary. Here is what we do not know. What did Battelle's full raw dataset actually contain? We have the summary findings of Special Report Number 14. The raw data, 3,201 individual case cards with analyst ratings, would allow modern statistical analysis using tools that did not exist in 1954. Where is that raw data today? Why did the Air Force contradict its own study? Special Report Number 14 demonstrated that better observations produced more unknowns. the exact inverse of the misidentification hypothesis. The rational institutional response would have been to invest in better observation. Instead, the Air Force invested in better explanations. What internal pressure accounts for that decision? What did the Washington radar actually track? The temperature inversion explanation remains contested 74 years later. The experienced air traffic controllers at National Airport were certain they could distinguish inversion artifacts from solid targets. Were those operators wrong? Or was the Air Force explanation the convenient one? And what did Edward Ruppelt know that he did not put in his book? He had the clearance. He had the access. He had cooperation from people across the Air Force who trusted him. His 1956 book is remarkably detailed, but it ends abruptly, as if the story stopped mid-sentence. In 1960, a revised edition appeared with 3 additional chapters dismissing UFOs entirely. A reversal so sharp that his widow later attributed it to pressure from his superiors. Ruppelt died on September 15, 1960, of a heart attack. He was 37 years old. The one insider who might have said more never got the chance. Blue Book, at its peak, was the investigation the phenomenon deserved. One captain, backed by 2 generals, armed with authority and an engineering mind and a refusal to prejudge the answer. He built standardized reporting. He commissioned the most rigorous analysis ever attempted. He produced a statistical case that should have been impossible to ignore. And then, in the summer of 1952, objects appeared on radar over the capital of the United States. 3 radar systems, restricted airspace, interceptors that could not close. The question stopped being about evidence. It became about control. The CIA decided the situation needed to be managed. And what they meant by managed was something very different from what Ruppelt meant by investigated. Every source cited in this episode is linked at unresolvedsignals.com. If you have a document we have not seen, a connection we missed, or a correction we need to make, the submission portal is open. In January of 1953, 5 scientists entered a secure room at the Pentagon. They had been given 12 hours to review 6 years of evidence. The CIA organized the meeting. The Air Force provided the cases. Nobody told the public it was happening. What those scientists recommended in 4 days would shape American UFO policy for the next 7 decades. Next time on Unresolved Signals, the Robertson Panel. A note on how this show is made. Unresolved Signals is produced using artificial intelligence and human editorial oversight. AI is a powerful research and production tool. It is also a tool that can and does make mistakes. We will do everything in our power to ensure that every detail we share is backed by real research and real sources. Our job is to find the connections across thousands of documents in dozens of languages that no single person could process alone. When we get something wrong, we will correct it publicly. Every source is linked at unresolvedsignals.com, where you can read the original documents yourself and check our work. If you'd like to sponsor this show or partner with Unresolved Signals, visit unresolvedsignals.com/sponsor.
Unresolved Signals is produced by Talentless AI, produced and directed by Steve Mudd, research compiled and cross-referenced using Google Notebook LM, narration generated by 11 Labs, research coordination, script writing, and source verification by Claude. Original source documents accessed through government archives, university collections, and public repositories worldwide. This has been Unresolved Signals. Every document, every country, every question, every release. This is Unresolved Signals. Next time, the Robertson Panel. 5 scientists, 4 days, 7 decades of consequences.